I was 73 years old when the bull arrived, and I'd spent 4 decades perfecting the art of not remembering. My name is Franklin Tate, and the Tate farm had been in our family for 5 generations. 200 acres of good Virginia soil, a herd of Black Angus that won ribbons at the county fair, a barn my grandfather built with his own hands that still stood straight after 90 years. To my grandchildren, Ethan, Noah, Liam, Sophie, and little Mia, this place was their inheritance, their birthright, the land their Papa Franklin had worked his entire life to maintain. They didn't know it was built on a lie. The truck came up the drive on a Tuesday morning in late September, kicking up dust that caught the slanting autumn light. I was on the porch with my coffee, watching the way I'd watched 1,000 mornings, when I saw the livestock trailer slow at our gate. "Papa, there's a delivery truck," Sophie called from inside the house. She was 17, sharp as a tack, studying agriculture at the community college. "Did you order something?" "No," I said, but my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. The driver, a young man with a clipboard and tired eyes, climbed out and walked toward the porch. "Franklin Tate?" "That's me. Got a bull for you. Transfer from the Whitlock operation down in Tennessee. Paperwork says he's been rejected from their breeding program, but still has good years left in him." He held out the clipboard. "Just need your signature." The name hit me like a fist to the chest. Whitlock. "There's been a mistake," I managed. "We didn't order any bull from the Whitlock farm." The driver checked his papers, frowning. "Says right here, Franklin Tate, Tate Farm, Virginia. Bull named Lulu, age 7, rejected breeding stock, transfer agreed upon by..." He squinted at the signature. "George Whitlock. George Whitlock." My brother's name, written in ink on official paperwork, 40 years after I'd stolen everything that should have been his. "Papa?" Sophie was beside me now, touching my arm. "You okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," I lied, the way I'd been lying for 4 decades. "There's been some confusion with the delivery. Let me sort it out." But even as I said it, the driver was already backing the trailer up to our loading chute, and I found myself walking toward it like a man in a dream, or maybe a nightmare I'd been trying to wake from since 1983. The ramp came down with a metallic clang. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard hooves on metal, slow and deliberate, and the bull emerged into the Virginia sunlight. He was massive, easily 1,800 pounds, Black Angus crossed with something else I couldn't quite place, his coat so dark it was almost blue in certain light. But it wasn't his size that stopped my breath. It was the mark on his left flank, a distinctive scar pattern, almost like a brand but not quite, 3 parallel lines that curved slightly at the bottom, the kind of mark that comes from an accident, something specific and unrepeatable. I'd seen that exact mark before, 40 years ago, on a young calf in a barn that no longer existed, on land I'd taken from the only person who'd ever trusted me completely. The bull, Lulu, they'd called him, though what kind of name was that for an animal this size, stepped off the ramp and turned his massive head toward me. His eyes found mine, dark and knowing, and I felt something crack inside my chest that I'd kept carefully sealed for 4 decades. He knew. It was impossible, insane, the kind of thought a rational man would dismiss immediately. But I wasn't feeling particularly rational as I stared at this animal that shouldn't exist, bearing a mark that shouldn't be possible, sent by a name I hadn't spoken aloud in 40 years. "Papa, he's beautiful," Sophie breathed beside me. "Look at his conformation. Even if he's rejected breeding stock, he's still an incredible animal." "Why would the Whitlocks reject him?" Ethan asked, joining us at the fence. My oldest grandson, 22, studying veterinary medicine, the pride of our family. "He looks perfectly healthy." "Temperament issues, probably," the driver offered, handing me the clipboard I still hadn't signed. "That's usually why bulls get rejected. Too aggressive or too docile, something that makes them unsuitable for breeding programs." But Lulu wasn't showing any temperament issues. He stood calm and still in the handling area, his eyes never leaving mine, waiting for something I couldn't name. "There's a note here," the driver added, pulling a sealed envelope from his pocket. "Mr. Whitlock said to give this directly to Franklin Tate, no one else." My hand shook as I took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was careful, deliberate, nothing like the scrawled signature on the delivery paperwork. Just 3 words. You remember now? Papa? Sophie's voice was concerned. What does it say? I crumpled the envelope in my fist before anyone could see it. Nothing important, just delivery confirmation. Another lie. Add it to the thousands I'd told over the years, each one a brick in the wall I'd built between truth and consequence. I signed the paperwork because I didn't know what else to do. The driver left. Ethan and Noah moved Lulu into the empty pen near the old barn, my grandfather's barn, the one that should have been George's by rights, not mine. And I stood there in the September sunlight, watching a bull that shouldn't exist, sent by a brother I'd betrayed, carrying a mark I recognized from a night 40 years ago when I'd made a choice that damned us both. That evening, after dinner, I went out to the pen alone. The family was inside, Sophie doing homework, Ethan reviewing case studies, Mia practicing piano with Clara, my daughter-in-law who'd never known George, who'd only heard the sanitized version of family history where I was the hard-working son who'd kept the farm alive. Lulu stood in the corner of the pen, and when I approached, he walked toward me with none of the caution bulls usually showed. He stopped just on the other side of the fence, so close I could see the white rim around his dark eyes, and made a sound low in his throat. Not aggressive, not fearful. Recognition. You can't be, I whispered. It's not possible. But the mark on his flank said otherwise, and the way he tilted his head, the specific angle that reminded me so viscerally of that night in 1983, of flames and screaming animals, and a choice I'd made in 30 seconds that I'd regretted for 14,000 days since. I reached out, my old hand trembling, and touched his massive shoulder. His hide was warm beneath my palm, solid and real and undeniably present. What do you want from me? I asked the bull, asked the universe, asked the ghost of my brother who might or might not be dead for all I knew, who I'd driven away with theft and lies and the kind of betrayal that broke families beyond repair. Lulu just stood there, patient and knowing, and I understood with terrible clarity that this wasn't a mistake in delivery. This was a reckoning 40 years in the making. And the secret I'd buried was about to claw its way back into the light. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Marianne for 41 years. She'd been gone 3 years now, cancer, and stared at the ceiling while memories I'd spent decades suppressing clawed their way back to the surface. 1983. I was 33 years old. George was 31. Our father had died the previous winter, leaving the farm to both of us equally. 2 brothers, 200 acres, a modest herd, and a barn full of equipment that barely worked. We were supposed to run it together, split everything 50-50, build something for our families. But I'd wanted more. The details came back in fragments, sharp-edged and cutting. George's pregnant wife, Evelyn, due with their first child. My own wife, Marianne, already raising 2-year-old Clara. The farm barely producing enough for 1 family, let alone 2. And the offer, God, that offer from the developer who wanted to buy the back 100 acres for a residential subdivision. George had said no. Said our father would roll in his grave if we sold family land for housing developments. Said we'd find another way. I'd forged his signature on the sale documents. I'd pocketed the entire payment. Enough money to modernize the operation, buy better breeding stock, expand the herd. Enough to transform the struggling Tate farm into something profitable, something I could be proud of. And when George found out, when he came to the barn that October night with the unsigned papers in his hand, his face twisted with betrayal. The fire. I jerked upright in bed, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. The memory was so vivid I could smell the smoke, hear the animals screaming, see George's face illuminated by flames as the old equipment shed burned. There'd been a calf in there. A black Angus calf with a distinctive injury on its flank, 3 parallel cuts from tangled wire that George had been planning to treat in the morning. The shed had been full of hay and dry wood. The fire had moved faster than anyone expected. George had run inside. I'd stood frozen, watching, the unsigned papers still in my hand. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived, the shed was gone. George was in the hospital with severe burns and smoke inhalation. The calf was dead, or so I'd thought. Everything George owned had been in that shed, his tools, his records, the evidence of my fraud. When he was released from the hospital 2 weeks later, I'd had my lawyer ready. Papers showing that George had signed the land sale. Papers showing that his accusations of fraud were the ramblings of a man with brain damage from smoke inhalation. Papers that threatened legal action if he didn't leave quietly. Evelyn had been 7 months pregnant. They had no money, no home. The farmhouse had been in my name since our father's estate settled. George had looked at me with eyes I still saw in nightmares and said 5 words I'd never forgotten. "You'll answer for this, Franklin." Then they'd left, disappeared into Tennessee. I'd heard rumors over the years that Evelyn had given birth to a son, that George had found work on cattle ranches, that he'd never spoken my name again. I'd told everyone George had left because he couldn't handle farm life, couldn't live up to the legacy. I'd built a successful operation on the money I'd stolen, raised my daughter, watched my grandchildren be born into prosperity purchased with betrayal. And now, 40 years later, a bull bearing the impossible mark of that dead calf had arrived at my door with a message from my brother. Morning came too soon. I dragged myself downstairs to find Sophie already in the kitchen, studying feed nutrition tables while eating toast. "Morning, Papa," she said brightly. "I checked on Lulu earlier. He's settling in well. Really calm for a rejected bull. I'm thinking maybe the Whitlocks misjudged his temperament." The name was a knife every time I heard it. "That's good," I managed, pouring coffee with unsteady hands. "Papa, are you okay? You've seemed off since that bull arrived yesterday." Sophie's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Did you know the Whitlocks?" The delivery guy said they were from Tennessee. "Long time ago," I said carefully. "Not important." But it was important. It was everything. And as I walked out to the pens after breakfast, I felt it again. That sense of reckoning, of debts coming due. Lulu was standing in the same corner as last night, and when I approached, he walked to the fence with that same deliberate calm. Ethan was there too, running his veterinarian student eyes over the bull's frame. "Papa, come look at this," Ethan called. "See this scarring on his flank? It's really unusual. Almost looks like it was caused by something specific, maybe wire or sharp metal. I've never seen a pattern quite like it." My throat closed. "It's just an old injury." "Yeah, but the interesting thing is," Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "I was researching bull genetics last night for a project, and I found this really old agricultural blog post from Tennessee. Someone documented a calf with almost this exact scarring pattern back in the early 80s, said it was from a wire accident, and the calf died in a barn fire." The world tilted. "That can't be the same animal," Ethan continued, oblivious to my distress. "That was 40 years ago. But the genetic line might be the same. Bulls from that Tennessee operation have a really distinct lineage. I wonder if Lulu's descended from—" "Ethan, I need you to do something for me," I interrupted, my voice rough. "I need you to find out everything you can about the Whitlock cattle operation. Who owns it, what their breeding program looks like, any family history you can dig up." Ethan looked surprised but nodded. "Sure, Papa. Any particular reason?" "Just curious about the bull's background." Another lie. Add it to the mountain. That afternoon, while the family was scattered, Sophie at class, the younger kids at school, Clara at work, I stood alone by Lulu's pen and finally opened the crumpled envelope I'd kept in my pocket since yesterday. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a young man, maybe 30, standing beside a black Angus bull. The bull had 3 distinctive scars on its flank. The man's face was weathered, marked by burns on one side, but unmistakably George. Unmistakably my brother, 40 years older than the last time I'd seen him. The note was brief. "Franklin, this is Echo, son of the calf that died in the fire you didn't start but didn't stop either. I pulled him out that night after you drove away, raised him in Tennessee. He lived 19 years, fathered 47 calves. Lulu is his grandson. I'm dying, Franklin. Cancer, 6 months if I'm lucky. Before I go, I need you to know I remember everything. Evelyn's gone 3 years now. Our son Jonas knows nothing about you, about the farm, about what you took from us. Lulu is rejected from my breeding program because he's too gentle, too trusting. Reminds me of who I used to be before my brother taught me that trust was for fools. You have a choice now, same as you had 40 years ago. You can keep lying to your family about who you really are, or you can tell them the truth, that everything they have was built on theft and fraud and a man too coward to run into a burning building. Either way, I wanted you to remember. Wanted you to look at that bull every day and know what you cost us. George. My hands shook so badly the paper fluttered. George was dying. George had a son named Jonas who didn't know about me, about this farm that should have been half his inheritance. George had spent 40 years raising cattle descended from the calf I'd left to burn, and he'd sent me his gentlest bull, the one that reminded him of trust and betrayal, as a final message. That night at dinner, Sophie asked about Lulu again. I really think we should keep him, Papa. Even if he's not breeding stock, he'd be perfect for 4-H demonstrations. He's so calm. Kids could learn proper handling with him. We're not keeping him, I said too sharply. Everyone looked at me. Why not? Noah asked, confused. We've got the space, and Sophie's right, he's really well-tempered. Because every time I look at him, I see my brother's face in the firelight. Because he's a living testament to the worst thing I ever did. Because keeping him means confronting truth instead of running from it like I've been running for 40 years. We just can't, I said, standing abruptly. That's final. I left the table before anyone could argue, before Sophie's hurt expression could crack the walls I'd built, before little Mia could ask why Papa was acting so strange. That night, alone again with my memories and my guilt, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would call the number on the delivery paperwork. I would tell them to come get Lulu, take him back to Tennessee, remove this reminder of my sins from my property. But even as I thought it, I knew it was too late. The remembering had started. And once you start remembering, you can't stop. 3 days passed, and I couldn't make the call to send Lulu away. Every morning I'd pick up the phone, dial the first few numbers, then hang up. Because sending him back meant admitting I was still running, still choosing comfort over truth. And because Sophie had already fallen in love with him, she spent every spare moment at his pen, talking to him like he understood every word. Maybe he did. Maybe George had raised his cattle with the same patient gentleness he'd once shown me, back before I taught him that brothers could betray each other. Papa, I've been thinking, Sophie said over breakfast on the 4th day. What if we used Lulu for my senior project? I could document proper handling techniques for calm-tempered bulls, show how they're valuable even if they're not aggressive breeding stock. My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Sophie, we've talked about this. But why not? He's perfect for it, and it would help my college applications. I said no. The words came out harsher than I intended. The kitchen went silent. Clara stopped loading the dishwasher. Ethan looked up from his laptop. Even little Mia, coloring at the table, went still. Franklin, Clara said quietly, using my first name instead of Dad the way she did when she was serious. What's going on? You've been acting strange since that bull arrived. If there's a problem with him, just tell us. I looked at my daughter, 42 years old, raised in the prosperity I'd stolen, believing her grandfather was a hard-working farmer who'd built something from nothing. How could I tell her the truth? That her education, her home, everything she'd given her own children came from fraud? There's no problem, I lied. I'm just tired, but Ethan wasn't letting it go. Papa, I did that research you asked about. The Whitlock operation in Tennessee. It's really interesting, actually. My heart stopped. They've been running a small breeding program for 40 years. Started by a man named George Whitlock in 1983. Ethan paused, looking at me with sudden curiosity. That's the same last name as Grandma Marianne's maiden name, isn't it? The room tilted. I'd forgotten. Somehow, in 40 years, I'd forgotten that detail. That Marianne had been a Whitlock before we married. That George had married her cousin Evelyn. Papa? Sophie's voice was concerned now. Are you related to the people who sent Lulu? George Whitlock is... I started, then stopped. The truth was right there, pressing against my teeth, demanding release. He was... my brother. The silence was absolute. Your brother? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. You never told us you had a brother. We had a falling out, long time ago. He left the farm, went to Tennessee. I haven't spoken to him since. But he sent you a bull, Ethan said slowly, his sharp mind already working through implications. After 40 years of not speaking, he sends you breeding stock? That doesn't make sense unless... Unless what? Sophie asked. Unless it's a message. Unless it's a reminder. Unless it's a dying man's final attempt to make me face what I did. I need some air, I said, standing abruptly and walking out before anyone could stop me. I found myself at Lulu's pen, the bull watching me with those dark, knowing eyes. He walked to the fence without hesitation, and I placed my hand on his massive shoulder just like George used to do with the cattle when we were young, before everything broke. He's dying, I whispered to the animal. Your owner, my brother. And I don't know how to fix what I broke. Lulu made that low sound in his throat again, and suddenly I was crying, something I hadn't done since Marianne's funeral. Something I hadn't let myself do for the 40 years of guilt I'd carried. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Sophie. Papa, she said gently. Whatever happened between you and your brother, maybe Lulu is here to help you fix it. You can't fix some things, sweetheart. Maybe not. But you can try. I looked at my granddaughter, 17, idealistic, believing the best of people because she'd never learned that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. What if the truth changes everything? I asked. Then maybe everything needs to change, Sophie said simply. And in that moment, standing beside a bull that carried 40 years of secrets in his bloodline, I realized she was right. The only question was whether I had the courage to let it. That night, I sat at my desk with George's letter and made a phone call I should have made 40 years ago. The number on the delivery paperwork rang 4 times before a man answered. His voice was younger than I expected, tired but kind. Whitlock Ranch. This is Franklin Tate. I received a bull from your operation. Lulu. Silence. Then, you're Franklin Tate? My father's brother? Jonas. George's son. The nephew I'd never met, never acknowledged, whose inheritance I'd stolen before he was even born. Yes, I managed. I'm your uncle. I know who you are. His voice went cold. My father told me everything before he died, 2 weeks ago. Cancer took him faster than the doctors expected. Dead. George was dead. I'd waited too long, run too long, and now he was gone. I'm sorry. Are you? Jonas cut me off. Sorry he's dead, or sorry you got caught, because sending Lulu to you was his last wish. He wanted you to remember what you took from us. Wanted you to see every day what guilt looks like. Jonas, I know I can't change the past. No, you can't. But you can tell the truth. That's what my father really wanted. Not revenge, just honesty. He spent 40 years watching you build a life on money you stole, while my mother worked 2 jobs and he did ranch work until his hands gave out. And he never told anyone because he didn't want to destroy your family the way you destroyed ours. The words hit like punches. He could have pressed charges. Could have... He loved you, Jonas said simply. Even after everything, he still loved his brother. That's why he never came after you legally. But he's gone now, and I'm not him. You have 1 week to tell your family the truth, or I will. They deserve to know where their prosperity came from. The line went dead. I sat there in the darkness, understanding finally what George had done. He'd given me a choice, confess on my own terms, or have the truth forced out. The next morning, I gathered everyone in the living room. Clara, Ethan, Sophie, Noah, Liam, little Mia. 3 generations of family built on a foundation of lies. There's something I need to tell you, I began, my voice shaking. About your Uncle George, about this farm, about who I really am. Sophie reached over and took my hand. We're listening, Papa. And for the first time in 40 years, I stopped running. I told them everything. The forged signature, the stolen money, the night of the argument, and what I'd failed to do. The family I'd driven away. The cousin they'd never known. Jonas, who had every right to half of everything we owned. When I finished, the silence was deafening. Clara was crying quietly. Ethan stared at his hands. Sophie still held mine, though her grip had tightened. "So this farm," Noah said slowly, "everything we have, it's not really ours?" "Half of it belongs to Jonas," I said, "by rights, by law, by any measure of justice." "What are you going to do?" Clara asked, her voice thick with emotion. I looked out the window at Lulu's pen, at the bull who'd carried the truth across state lines and 40 years of silence. "I'm going to make it right," I said, "however long it takes, whatever it costs." "Even if it means losing everything?" Ethan asked. "I already lost everything that mattered," I replied. 40 years ago. I've just been pretending otherwise." Sophie squeezed my hand. "Then we'll help you find it again, Papa." And in that moment, with my family around me and the truth finally spoken, I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 decades. Peace. 2 months later, Jonas drove up that same gravel road where Lulu's truck had arrived. I watched from the porch, my heart pounding, as a man who looked so much like George stepped out, same build, same walk, but without the weight of betrayal my brother had carried. "Uncle Franklin," he said simply. We stood there for a long moment, 2 men separated by 40 years of pain. Then Sophie came out, walked straight to Jonas, and extended her hand. "I'm Sophie, your cousin. Welcome to the farm." Her courage broke the ice. Within an hour, Jonas was sitting at our kitchen table with legal documents spread between us. Papers that would transfer half ownership of the farm to him, papers that acknowledged the debt, papers that tried to quantify something that could never truly be repaid. "I don't want to take the farm from you," Jonas said quietly. "That's not why I'm here. You have every right. My father didn't send Lulu for revenge. He sent him because he hoped you'd finally be honest. And you were." Jonas looked around at the kitchen, at the family photos on the walls. "He wanted you to have peace, Uncle Franklin, even after everything." The words broke something loose in me. "I don't deserve peace." "Maybe not, but you chose truth over comfort. That's worth something." We worked out an agreement. Jonas would take a financial settlement rather than splitting the physical farm. It was generous, more than fair, funded by mortgaging property I'd thought was free and clear. The family would have less, live simpler, work harder. But we'd live honestly. Ethan took a semester off veterinary school to help run the operation with fewer resources. Sophie got a part-time job, putting her college savings toward the family debt. Even little Mia started a vegetable garden to help with expenses. And Lulu stayed because Sophie had been right. He belonged here, teaching gentleness to a family that had forgotten what honesty looked like. 6 months after the confession, Jonas brought his family to visit. His wife, his 2 teenage sons, George's grandchildren meeting their cousins for the first time. I watched them all in the yard, 3 generations learning each other, and felt George's absence like a physical ache. He should have been here to see this. Should have seen his son and grandchildren standing on land that was rightfully half theirs. Jonas found me by Lulu's pen. "He would have forgiven you, you know, if you'd asked." "I know," I said. "That's what makes it worse." "No." Jonas put his hand on my shoulder. "That's what makes it worth fixing." That evening, as the sun set over the farm, our farm now legally and honestly shared, I stood with my hand on Lulu's shoulder and finally said the words out loud that I should have said 40 years ago. "I'm sorry, George, for everything, for all of it." The bull made that low sound in his throat, and I chose to believe it meant something. Chose to believe that somewhere, somehow, my brother knew. The farm was smaller now, harder, but it was ours truthfully, built on honesty instead of theft, and that made every difficult day worth it. Lulu taught Sophie everything she needed for her agricultural program. Taught all of us, really, that gentleness has value, that trust is precious, that some mistakes can be acknowledged even if they can't be undone. And every morning when I walked out to feed him, I remembered. Not with shame anymore, with gratitude, because a rejected bull had given me what 40 years of success never could, a chance to finally live with the truth.